Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jeff Lee. I'm actually in our Brooklyn showroom today. I am joined today with Matt Brasier, who's actually joining us all the way from the UK, so we do appreciate him coming in very late at his time. So certainly appreciate that. But welcome to a very special event with our great partners over at StyleShoots. Like mentioned, we are joined today by Matt Brasier, who is the Creative Director at StyleShoots and has over 20 years of commercial photography experience. So we are in great company, and he's going to answer all of our questions today about the world of e-commerce and what the StyleShoots machines are all about. So hello, Matt, and thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Jeff. It's really lovely to be here. And yeah, welcome. Hopefully we can have a nice session here and get to the bottom of some of your questions.
Absolutely. So Matt, why don't you, for those that don't know who you are, haven't had the pleasure of working with you, why don't you give us a quick rundown of your photography background and just sort of how you ended up at StyleShoots, you know, and obviously how the experience that you've collected over those years has parlayed to, you know, what you do at the company now.
Okay. Yeah. So I started, I was really interested in photography at school, actually, and started photographing my mates skateboarding. So that's really where I got started. And that led on to, you know, assisting, working in dark rooms and studios and sort of trying to work my way up and do the whole assisting apprentice type thing. I did have a brief spell at college, but it wasn't much use to me, to be honest. But then ended up working in catalog studios, which for me is like the precursor to the internet, because it's essentially the same thing. You have to basically communicate your product out to the world using visuals, and instead of scrolling on a web page, you're flicking through pages. So the skills are pretty much, you know, there's a definite correlation between catalog direct shopping and the internet. And then I worked at a large department store in the UK called Debenhams and set up their studio, and that was on the border of things going digital. So that was the first website business that I was involved in. Yeah. Then subsequently moved on to Net-a-Porter, the luxury shop, online store. Yeah, and funnily enough, StyleShoots came along a little bit after that. I saw it on a blog, and it said, the title of the blog was Product Photography Without the Photographer. And I was somewhat offended, as any photographer might be. But I was intrigued as well. I love technology, and I thought, you know, this would be a great thing to, you know, if it really worked, it could be a great addition to any studio that's struggling with, you know, creating content. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's important to highlight, definitely, that these tools were meant and created to assist but not replace photographers and their skill sets. Certainly, you know, I don't think you would have joined the company if they indeed were selling, you know, automated robots that did everything and took away the creative process. You know, that's certainly important. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you know, and you've already touched upon it a little bit, which is great, that you sort of detailed what's changed over the years, you know, from print photography to catalogs, and now, of course, with today's e-commerce engines and just this sort of fast-paced, you know, industry that it really has become. So, in your thoughts, like what other things have changed, and what are the big sort of highlights over the past couple of years?
I think you know, there's a bigger appetite for imagery than there ever was, and so I think what we tend to look at StyleShoots is finding a tool that can keep pace with the production levels required, but also we've moved away a lot from, I guess, standard-looking pack-shotty type things to something that can be the creative tool that people want. You know, we still want to have the smartness, we still want to have the automation, but I think what's really changed is people's appetite for imagery, but also their taste. You know, like the quality of the imagery for selling online has to be, you know, top notch, and I think that's you know, it's bound to happen. We're more visually aware. Everybody has a smartphone. Everybody's scrolling through imagery, you know, day in, day out. So I think people's perception of what makes a quality image is sort of rising, and their expectations are rising.
Would you describe some of these challenges, with today's environment, accelerated, or kind of keeping the same pace because of things like COVID, or like, how do you think that affected? Obviously it affected everyone in the world, but how do you think specifically it affected the retail and e-commerce sort of machines? Or
I think, yeah. I mean, for us as a business, our requests went through the roof. Well, let me start at the very beginning of it. I think everything just crashed and fell off a hill, and for a couple of months, nobody did anything. But then I suppose businesses, especially photography studios, faced a real challenge, and that was, how can we do this when we're all stuck at home? And that many companies approached it in different ways. But I heard a lot here in London of people, photography managers sending their staff home with gear. So, sending them home with a DSLR and some lights, and then they would ship them boxes of goods on a sort of daily basis, and see what the photographers could get through. And that of course meant that the photographer had to be, had to have enough space to do that. Particularly ASOS, we heard from them, they changed a lot of the style of their photography to incorporate more still life, because it was just impossible to run a model shoot during those early COVID times, and even now, actually, the limitations on the numbers of people in the studio, hair, makeup, stylist, photographer, model, it's just not possible. So a lot of a switch towards shooting stuff on still life, which ASOS never did before for clothing, for instance. So then they started to shoot flat lay, and they started to shoot, accessories and stuff in different ways.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, and you mentioned this too just now, but building an effective studio, for a lot of us with smaller apartments or homes, it's not necessarily possible. So, what's interesting about these machines, as we go throughout this conversation, we'll naturally talk about how it can be operated by essentially a very small crew. It could be down to one, if you want to have sort of the photographer and stylist roles combined. So can you talk a little bit about maybe, and you mentioned, lay flats, so maybe we start with like the horizontal and the vertical product for StyleShoots, and how that might work in sort of this COVID world that we're in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, all of our machines are designed around simple operation, iPad controlled, and I think that's become really valuable in this, particularly in this time, but also in general. I mean, having an operator or a stylist to be able to get on there and produce, once everything's set up, it could be a photographer that sets everything up for them, but then they can go off and produce. And we look heavily at the ergonomics of the machines as well. So what's it like to use it all day if you are on your own, and if you're having to bend down or lean into things and get a bad back all day or whatever. We do look at that if you were alone, what would it be like to operate this machine, and there's been a huge request for the vertical machine in recent times, simply because that mannequin look can still give the customer a lot of information about that product, and doesn't necessarily have to have a model in it. Others have also been using it to comp in a model to those hollow man type images, which I think is a really interesting thing, and a great use for the machines. But even down to the models. So, if you are able to, socially distance in a studio but have the model there, there's a significant difference, distance from the model and the operator. So that kind of, fits in nicely to the regulations. Yeah. So I think it's,
yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I think the one person operation is kind of what we've always done from the very beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it really is shows that you guys are kind of ahead of the time in that regard because you were designing these machines to be simple. And obviously, we want the photographer to have the creativity to set up the shots in in the way that would benefit the brand that they're photographing. But at the same time, you take some of the repetitive stuff out of the equation and you just focus on the creative. So actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to step back a little bit. You had mentioned that the challenge in e-commerce, and I'll quote you here, literally distills down to something quite simple. So what would that distillation of the challenges be, for e-commerce, would you say?
I think it's really down to that triangle, I think, of quality, speed, and quantity. Cost, speed, and quantity. It's that triangle. You can't have it all. You're going to compromise one of those three elements if you try. But we'd like to look at that a little bit differently and say, well, there are some trade-offs to be made, but if you use automation or if you use standard setups, you can then start to achieve a consistent and high quality image without a huge amount of resource. It's not to say that you'd want to stick to something that's very bland and very standard. The creativity is still an important bit, but if you set yourself up in the correct way, then we believe that you're able to hit some of those metrics that you wouldn't necessarily hit in a traditional setup.
Yeah, and actually, we should have done this earlier, but I'd like to show some of the imagery that you provided us. So you mentioned things like, on mannequin photography versus lay flat. So for those that haven't seen it, perhaps we can, and I'll ask our technical director, Avery, there. So so those are the machines. But if we look at one of the slides that's on mannequin photography that has the three outfits side by side, Avery, if you can maybe pull that image up. When you get a chance. Yeah, perfect. So this is a great example of that ghost mannequin that you were just describing. And the next slide actually shows what that process looks like. So very easy for a single operator to be behind the wheel, as it were, or behind the iPad, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so how would you describe, and I'm curious, as someone who doesn't have as many years of experience, and certainly not in the commercial photography realm, when brands see mannequin photography like this, or ghost mannequin, versus, say, lay flats, like what are they really, what are the big jumping out points that really differentiate the two? Like naturally, you could see it on the form, it resembles a body with the mannequin versus lay flat, but do you see key advantages in either direction, or is it depending on what the brand's looking for or looking to do?
Yeah, I think the key thing for mannequin is really fit. I think if you think about children's wear and men's wear, it's less about the fit. But when it comes to women's wear, I think it's crucial that you show fit and you show it well. And I think that's what mannequins do. How will that look on me? Because when you shoot something flat, if you don't pay a huge amount of attention, you're going to end up with something that looks quite wide and quite dead in a way. When we wear clothes, we wear them and they fit around our body. And if you lie them flat, you have a lot more fabric to deal with. So you could spend a lot of time and use tissue paper and tuck things in and do all that, or you could dress a mannequin very quickly, and you get that effect of what it actually looks like when it's worn. How does it fit the form and the shape? And I think for women's wear, that's a crucial element. What is the fit of that particular dress, that particular blouse? I think more so than with menswear and kids wear.
Sure. Something else to point out too, though, about lay flat is that you can add elements to it, and I've seen actually samples that you've showed us that you model the outfit, and I think that's the key word. It's an outfit. It doesn't have to be a single piece of clothing. Of course, it could be on a lay flat, but I love the concept of being able to sort of do maybe more lifestyle-centric stuff where you pair certain elements of the outfit together. From accessories.
Yeah, sure. I think they're two different ways of selling. You know, you've got your aspirational content. You know, the stuff that's going to sort of sell the idea. But then when the shopper clicks through, they need to know what they're actually getting. What are those single items that I'm getting? And I think that's where mannequin photography in particular is quite good at. Okay, this is the front view, this is the back view. I know what I'm getting. You know, so an outfit's great to show. You know, context, and especially on a model, or as a flat lay like an opening banner or so. But the mannequin single shot is the great seller.
And for those that aren't familiar, apologies that we didn't really mention this, but you know, one of the key advantages of the vertical and horizontal machines, there is the ability for the machine to automatically remove the background. So then you have your product as a single layer with no other elements in the background, so that you can start to superimpose those onto other scenes, let's say, or actually just use it as a pure, let's say, white background. So when you're visiting your favorite e-com website, you just have beautiful product photography that's free from the background. So, you know, can you speak a little bit to sort of how the time saved is? I don't know if we have any specific example to share today, obviously, but you know, a huge part of the photography process is the post-production element. And what you guys have done very cleverly is remove a lot of the headache that comes with, you know, removing backgrounds and, you know, running through every image through a process or outsourcing it. So is there something you can speak to there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, when we started the adventure of StyleShoots, I think removing the background was a huge element of the process. We see the trend shifting away from that, but they're still incredibly useful. So, you know, if you look at something like Zara, for instance, they have essentially what looks like naturally shot garments on a white wall with a lovely drop shadow, and it all looks natural. The fact is, it's not. It's simply a nicely done edit, let's say. So, you know, the ability to have the alpha transparency and be able to then plop it onto something that looks more realistic is still a huge advantage. You know, you've got your lighting, you can light it just the way you want it, but then you can, let's say, put it into a scene and do that, you know, pretty seamlessly. And have, you know, I think we're moving away, even in COVID times, where production is sort of, you know, skyrocketed. We're moving away from the clean white, you know, invisible, you know, background sort of look into something more natural. And I think that's why, you know, Eclipse and Live have been successful in that way, because, you know, we're now talking about genuine looking photography. So it is nice to be able to have that cut out and place it on something more natural. But I think what customers are looking for now is much more context. If you see the shadow of something, your brain starts to tell you more about that product. So you get to look at context in terms of sizing between different products. And I think, you know, those sorts of more trustworthy elements of photography are sort of becoming a bit more of a trend.
Sure. And earlier you mentioned, you know, sort of the triangle, as it were, of you know, cost versus, you know, efficiency and, you know, whatnot. And often, right, the saying goes, you could have there's these three things, but you pick two type of give and take. So, you know, I think one of the things that the machines do so well is consistency, you know, which is one of the hallmarks of you know, what we can do with different StyleShoots machines. So can you speak a little bit to, you know, how do you go from, you know, inconsistent imagery that's different sizes, different angles, different lighting, etc., forward to something that's, you know, a constant look that is well established for a particular brand?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think, you know, the brain is very interesting in the way that it operates when it looks at imagery, and I think consistency is one of the things that I think a lot of research has been put into this by lots of different people, and you know, what people tend to see is if they see something that's a mishmash and a jumble, they tend to be put off very quickly. Whereas if they see something that's kind of uniform, they can already start to make up their mind about what it is that they want to buy. So you get into a more decisive headspace when you look at something consistent, as opposed to something that looks jumbled and chaotic. You're then looking at, okay, what are the elements in these particular things that attract me the most? And I think what we've always tried to do at StyleShoots is, you know, images are based on, you know, usually a background, a subject, and then context or lighting, for instance. So the lighting and the styling, but essentially those elements, when you bring them together, create a photograph. So when we look at the way Eclipse Live, you know, horizontal and vertical, the whole idea behind them is that we help you make those decisions faster and leave them the way that you made those decisions. So every time I switch on the StyleShoots machine, I get the lighting that I've pre-programmed into it. You know, I've got the settings just so for every time I touch it. And that means if somebody is rushing through the studio and kicks a light stand or whatever in a traditional setup, you might not realize for a week, and the post-production department might tell you a week later, hey, hold on, why is this all looking different, you know? And so I think we start with that in mind. Our mantra is consistency. And so, you know, if we're dialing in a motor setting of, you know, 82 degrees, that's what we want to see every single time. And I think that's a really underestimated, quite a powerful tool to be able to put that in people's hands, you know. And I think Eclipse, we were so shocked actually by Eclipse and how successful it was. You know, we've always banked on a certain idea being a success, but I think the hemispherical aspect of Eclipse is really something that's captured people's imagination, you know, and to be able to consistently place that camera at any particular point and come back a month later and be able to repeat exactly the same thing. It sort of blew people's minds a little bit once they got into it. It was like, oh, okay, that's really interesting, you know? Yeah.
We're certainly seeing that with folks who are looking at it for all types of, you know, product photography that you probably hadn't thought of during the design process, but now people are finding ways to use it because they're so excited by the capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've always been in fashion, but it's really interesting that when we get a tool manufacturer, for instance, who wants the power of that repeatability, and so they come to Eclipse, and that's really strange for us. We've never dealt with tool companies before, but it's really interesting to see what their requirements are and start to expand on what we offer for fashion into other areas, you know, supermarket, groceries, for instance, you know. Yeah.
I want to go back because we have some great visuals of consistency, you know, that you started to mention earlier. You know, you take a couple examples like the ones that you provided in pictures, and you go from sort of point A, I suppose, where nothing is consistent across and you know, this could be the same brand, this could be the same, you know, studio taking these photos, and then you take that and move it to the next step, which would be, you know, consistency, like you mentioned, across the entire brand, where you know, maybe the person that can't kick a light stand because lighting is built into the machines. So was this an actual client example, or, you know, can you speak a little bit to these and where these images came from?
No, essentially it is a client of ours, actually. It's Net-a-Porter, but essentially what it is that idea of uniformity and consistency. You know, I think what I learned from working at Net-a-Porter is they always treated their and the first time I heard this, I was really confused. And then it sort of took me 20 minutes and it sort of sank in. And then it was just like this light bulb moment. And that was a great experience. What they said was, no, at Net-a-Porter, we are a democracy. So every product gets treated the same. So it doesn't matter if you're $1,500 or you're $26. whatever that product is, it requires the same attention to detail, the same lighting, the same styling, philosophy, and it just sort of like blew my mind. And I remember there were companies, there were brands that would come to Net-a-Porter and they would say, well, I'm sorry, but I'm blah blah blah, and you need to give me a whole different look because I want it, otherwise you can't sell my product. And Net-a-Porter would just be like, no, sorry. It's a democracy, and the customer decides what they want to buy. We're not pushing any particular thing. What we want is for the customer to have that experience of choosing and getting the look that they want. So whether it was J. Crew or Gucci, everything was treated the same. And I think that's a really, really powerful way to go about it. You're putting that decision in the hands of the customer, and they, customers are your success point anyway, right? Without your customers, you don't have a business. So I think it's, when you look at that slide, it's all about red jackets. It's 4 or 5 red jackets. One of them could be $100, one could be $2,000, but the point is they've been treated in exactly the same way. And I think learning that, in my first month working at Net-a-Porter was really powerful. And it's always stuck with me that it doesn't matter what you're shooting, doesn't matter what you're presenting, do as best as you can that fits within the parameters that suit you, and your customers will appreciate you for it.
Right. And when we spoke a little bit earlier about things like creating a style guide as a brand, and you mentioned that a little bit just now. So, can you describe a little bit about the process of, say, defining a style guide and why that's so important?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a style guide is essentially a list of instructions, but what you're doing is analyzing each element in a photograph. And what I mentioned before, a photograph is what? It's a background, it's a subject, and it's a context. And so what your style guide does is it should give whoever's looking at it, give the feeling that they're shopping at that brand. Whether it's J. Crew or Gap or Gucci, they all have a brand look and an appeal that's well researched and well thought out, that fits with that brand or the customer profile or whatever it is. So when a collection comes along, there's a philosophy behind it. And it doesn't matter if it's Target or Gucci, the same rules apply, the same idea is there. How do you inspire?
And I do think it's worth mentioning, certainly, that StyleShoots actually has a style guide template available to download for free on the resource section of your website. So definitely worth checking out for those that don't have already created a style guide.
Yeah. And what that document does is it really gives you the instructions of what is the type of information that I should be noting down. What types of information should be in that style guide. It's not the world's definitive guide to style guides, but it's our version, and I think it's very translatable into settings on our systems as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And another interesting point, of course, which we only touched upon briefly, was the shift towards video. So you mentioned the Live and the Eclipse are capable of doing that. There's different sort of specialties that they both have, but what does the industry move to video look like, in your opinion, versus, say, stills? And obviously stills are still important, but there is definitely a growing trend of moving towards video elements.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we did a lot of research in this before we embarked on creating the Live machine. We saw that it was becoming a thing. It's not actually been adopted as fast as we'd expected or hoped, but it is really gaining ground now. And I think if I look at video, what are the advantages? Why would I want to use video? And I think it's really down to that thing I mentioned before, and that is being genuine. I think video is perceived to be more genuine, and I think in most cases it is, because it's harder to fake, it's harder to retouch, it's hard, you wouldn't be able to retouch 100 product videos in a day. It's just simply impossible for a small, for any size team, really. But it's that genuine thing, so people can get an idea that the product they're purchasing is genuine, and not just a photoshopped version of something, which might not be the genuine thing that comes through the post. And I think also there's things in video that immediately get your brain, automatically, without even thinking about it, you get more sense of what that product's about. It could be the way the fabric falls. It could be, your brain immediately makes up those sort of missing bits of information that you might not get from a still. Sheer sheen and reflections across the product surface. And I think, all of that, just, a couple of seconds of video is going to give you way more information than a still would, or even a series of stills. If a model is moving, or the turntable is moving, and you're seeing, a reflection drift across a product, you get a real sense of what those materials are, which you might not get in a retouched photograph. So I think, the amount of information a video gives you, and the fact that it can be more genuine, I think are two huge advantages of video.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And obviously AbelCine is biased because we come from a video background. But yeah, understanding that, you have so many more frames per second to look at a product, and it's absolutely critical, like you mentioned, like how it falls and the qualities of the fabric and everything else. So you touched on this briefly already, but this is really important, I think, when anyone is doing any sort of replicative work like this, where you're taking so many photographs or doing so many of anything, really, is coming up with a proper workflow. And you touch upon it with as far as the style guide goes, and that's sort of key to maintaining consistency. But something to point out also is the unglamorous side of workflow, which is sort of file management and then those type of things. So can you speak a little bit to sort of some of those recommendations and what the machines are doing as far as coming up with a workflow from start to finish, all the way to post?
Sure, absolutely. You've touched on a subject that's very close to my heart. I'm a bit of a workflow nerd, I have to say, and I think most people who work in the e-commerce industry are at heart. It's actually a fascinating science of how stuff gets from A to B, right? And it's the same with a photo studio. A photo studio is a single element. It's a small part in the whole chain of selling something. It's let's say the shop front. It's the important bit, but it's the bits around it that can really help you. And I think if you look at any workflow, it just requires every single part of that workflow to be determined in a I guess a smooth and orderly fashion. It's really quite a linear process most of the time. There are some things that can sort of happen in tandem, but essentially the photography part of it is one little blip in the life cycle of that product's sales process. So I think when I go out and help customers on this particular subject, we do some consulting, and we go out and people come to us and say, we love the machines, but we don't even know where to start doing this process. And what we do is we spend 5 or 6 days with them and understanding what they want to achieve and what their current process is, and then try and build it hopefully from scratch. It's not always possible, but we start with, where is your product? How are you going to get it to the studio? Does that require some sort of shipment? Do you want to have your photo studio close to your products? In most cases, the answer is yes. Now, that's a challenge in itself. How do you get people, creative people, models, etc., to a warehouse type facility? Maybe there's not some, maybe those two don't quite go together, but it's all the elements into it. So, okay, starts with the product. Without the product, we can't shoot anything. So then we need to prepare that product. We need to make sure it's going to the right station, the right start point in the process. So it needs to be unpackaged, it needs to be steamed, it needs to be outfitted if it's going on a model shoot. It needs to then be styled and prepared before the actual shots are taken. And then you've got the shots. That product then needs to be, in many cases, moved on to the post-production team because they would like to see it too. They need to look at that. Is the color correct? Am I getting everything I need from this? Because at a certain point, that product's got to go back, right? It's got to go back into stock or back to a sample room, or someone needs it for another part of the process. So it's a real challenge to get the products there in the first place. And then, as long as you build a nice, flow for those products, you should be okay. So we've done the photography, then we're on to post-production. Now the images need to then, once they're been post-produced, need to go off and be uploaded and be married up with the other content, because there's other parts of the process that's not just the images, but the copy is just as important as the images. So if you see those as a little package together, they then have to go into your content management and be uploaded so that they're visible and ready to buy. And the product then has to go back, like I said before, to where it needs to go. So there's so many elements leading up to and that follow the actual photographs being taken. So as StyleShoots, yes, we sell these lovely machines that can help you with consistency and all of that stuff, but it's really for nothing if you really want to go fast and you don't have the other bits of the process and the other bits of the puzzle ready. So that's where I think a lot of people fall down. It's like, I want to do 200 images on any given day, but if you don't have all the elements in place for you to get that ready, then it's not going to happen. It's just simply not going to happen. People can't just press a button and make stuff work. There is a lot of legwork in there already.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I mean, the machines, like you said, will take as many photos as you want it to, but if you don't have a workflow, definition for that after the fact, it just sits somewhere on a drive, not serving anyone any purpose. So that's absolutely a great point to bring up. And I forgot to mention this earlier, apologies, but for those that are watching and joining us live, first of all, thank you. And second of all, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the YouTube chat, and I'll be sure to take a look and we'll relay them to Matt, as we continue our conversation. So for those that haven't already contributed questions, and you do have any, please feel free to do so now. So, speaking of questions, obviously I want to get to them at some point. So we want to mention, or at least discuss, what we started to mention about how the StyleShoots machines can solve a lot of these problems. So, and that's sort of the main key talking point, I suppose, with how these machines can be used to solve all these problems with, say, one or two devices, depending on which one of the StyleShoots machines you're interested in. So is there anything in that, sort of category that you want to speak to, as opposed, as coming from, again, we touched upon this a little bit, photography, consistency, and et cetera?
I think it really comes down to what you want to achieve as a brand, what you want to achieve as a platform. The machines are essentially lights and cameras with some smart tech in between. But what you would need to decide is, what elements do I need to add to that to make that content look like mine, And I think whether you choose flat lay or mannequin or model, I think that's really down to how you want your brand to be communicated. Some people do a fantastic job of just showing off beautiful still lifes that really get you inspired. Other people really need that lifestyle element, of a model and a context for those products to kind of make them work. So I think it's really horses for courses. You need to know what you want to achieve, and that's the starting point. and people look to other platforms or other brands for inspiration. I would say that, but I might be quite biased because I worked at Net-a-Porter. I would say that having a still life and a model photo is really the best option, simply because, and it doesn't have to be that the model is incredibly expensive and is going to bankrupt you. You could also do unrecognizable. But the point about it is if you have that still life, there are other markets that might be open to you. If you didn't, if you didn't necessarily have that still life, there'd be some markets that could be quite closed for you. Thinking of the Middle East, for instance, there's certain rules and laws in the Middle East where you can't show skin. So a still life sells your product in those markets immediately. You can be online and not face any restrictions. If we look at the Asian market as well, there seems to be a perception around stuff that looks a bit too lifestyle-y and on a model of it not being genuine. And so, we have a lot of clients who use Tmall, for instance, which is one of, I guess it's an Ali platform now. And they have specifics on there where you need to show the genuine labels. It has to be still life, it has to have the genuine labels in there. Otherwise, because there's a lot of counterfeit problems in Asia, and people use still life to overcome those. So, you might see this model looking fantastic, wearing a pair of trousers. You might get something completely different in the post. But if they've at least shown the trousers as still life, shown that the genuine label and the hologram on the little ticket or whatever it is that companies use to sort of authenticate their products, I think that's a good point to bear in mind, that still life, even if you have modeled photography and video, still life still has its place in certain areas.
Yeah, well, thank you for that insight. That's really valuable. So we actually had a couple of questions from the audience that I want to get to. So first one relates a little bit to what we started the conversation with, which was retaining creativity as a photographer or stylist. So basically, this person's asking, how will you still retain the creativity that the photographer or stylist brings to the table? I guess if we're using horizontal, quite literally the table, but unintended there. So can you speak a little bit to that? Because again, it's really important that this does not take away from the creative aspect of the photography.
Sure. I mean, let me be very frank about the machines. They are a tool and they function in a certain way. You can still make terrible pictures with them, and you can just make them faster. But the point is that you bring your creativity to these. These are just tools. Think of it as camera and lights, but everything you put in front of that, that's your decision. If I'm wonderful at styling something flat lay and using tissue and getting my light drifting right across it, I've still got all that creativity. That's still up to me. It just means that all of the, let's say, the admin around that work is helped by using the machine. So I can scan a barcode, for instance, and have that ready for me. I can have the background removed if I want to, and that could help me. Or I could just simply have the light puck always in a particular position, because that's how I like my lighting. So there's very much a lot of creativity still left. I mean, if you look at our company name, StyleShoots, the style is what you bring to it. That's the important bit. That's the creative bit. And the other bit, the shoot, hopefully, we can help you with that element of it. Does that answer the question?
I think so, yeah. And naturally, if there's a follow-up to that, then we'll probably see it pop up here too, and I'll make sure to ask you. But that was great. Okay. Appreciate that. So this is a little bit future looking, but I thought it was an interesting question, which was this person is curious as to what you think the future might hold for this technology, particularly for, say, virtual fitting rooms and virtual try-ons and that type of thing. And again, this is more, I think, your expertise and your opinion, Matt, more than anything else, but I thought it was an interesting question, nevertheless.
Yeah, I mean, virtual fit is a really interesting technology. As far as I've seen, though, it's one that's, for whatever reason, the customer always drives these things forward, right? A technology is only useful if customers find it useful. And I've seen loads and loads of fit technologies, and still I haven't seen a company making that work and making that stick. I've seen H&M trial it, for instance, and they did a lot of work with fit companies and added a feature to their website where you could sort of virtually find out what your sizing was. And I think it was a lovely tool, and I couldn't see why it wouldn't be sensible. But for whatever reason, they've not sort of had the adoption. It may come, especially now where people are not able to visit shops. People are looking for more and more information, and I think for the companies themselves, what they're trying to do is reduce return rates, and I think fit companies are generally about helping the vendor rather than the customer at the moment. But I think if it can be perceived as more useful for the customer, then I think adoption will go up. But in terms of our machines, I mean, we can get very, very accurate on the information that comes in the metadata from our systems as to what exactly the size of something is in the frame, and using mannequins which we know are a certain size and it fits like this on this mannequin, we can make a pretty good accurate measurement of what that sizing is like, so nobody's really used our stuff in such a way as to populate those fit pieces of software. I know I worked quite extensively with a customer who was looking to only photograph the panels of garments and then virtually stitch them together. And I thought that was a really interesting way of doing it. So they were using the horizontal, and they would lay out jeans that before they were stitched together, like literally the panels, and then
like just
from that, and they were able to use our machine to find out exactly how big each of those panels were, and then put it into their system and generate the sort of 3D wrap of that size. So I thought that was super interesting, just using the inbuilt metadata of the file to calculate the size of that product, which I thought was pretty hot. But yeah, I think fit has never really boomed in the way that it probably should have.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure naturally, with anything technology-wise, I'm sure we'll be at a point where, like in sci-fi movies, you could just tap a button on your tablet and all of a sudden you wear a new outfit. But yeah, that is interesting. And thank you for your insight there, because that's really very interesting, especially the bit about the fabric, like you're mentioning. And we've seen some of that too with some of the clients that we've been speaking to just in the past year or so, where consistency of size is important. And, take, for example, products like a golf club or a guitar or something that has a relatively fixed size. It's important that camera position and lighting position stays constant throughout the shoot, not just for things like exposure, but also for file sizes and making sure things drop in easily. So that's kind of an interesting evolution, I think, of how the products probably were conceived, and then sort of the new markets that folks are finding good placement for these.
Absolutely. And that consistent camera position, combined with the knowledge that we know how big the sensor is and how many pixels equals how many centimeters, is a very easy calculation.
Right.
Yeah.
This is another question coming from our viewing audience.
Okay.
First of all, they're very impressed with the products and they think it's going to work really well. But they did have a question about sort of the various types of products. So I'm going to make an assumption that they work with a lot of brands, and from brand A to brand Z, there's always going to be a lot of differences in terms of finding the same look. And they actually provided an example. So how would you speak to using these machines for something like skincare and pet beds? Again, that was just a literal example from our audience.
Skincare. I mean, I think,
Skincare products, I should say, yeah.
okay. I mean, I think Eclipse is perfect for that. And I worked recently with a customer in Korea. They were doing a lot of cosmetics and skincare products. They loved being able to add video to that, and particularly like making little makeup smears. You know, I think that's also something that customers really like to see is, you know, how does that stuff apply? You know, and again, back to the amount of information you get from someone smearing something with their thumb, you get, you know, to understand what the viscosity of that product is like. So I think Eclipse is a perfect tool for doing cosmetic work for sure, and even getting your bottle pack shots and all that kind of stuff. I think it's yeah, it's a great one.
Yeah. So I'm being told that we should try to wrap up because I know we're running close to our scheduled time here, or maybe a little
Okay.
over. But certainly wanted to thank you for joining us today, Matt, especially coming from all the way from London. Appreciate you joining us late. I also wanted to mention that naturally you have, you're in London. The StyleShoots headquarters, of course, is in the Netherlands, Amsterdam to be more specific. And of course, here in the States, we have the entire StyleShoots lineup in the Brooklyn, AbelCine Brooklyn location. So if anyone is interested in future demos, we didn't get too specific into each machine capabilities, on purpose for this event, but certainly be very welcome to the idea of doing any future demos you want to see as particular machine or arrangement. A little bit more in more detail. Be happy to schedule that for everyone. So, do appreciate Matt you joining us again. Appreciate everyone for watching. Thank
My
you
pleasure.
Yeah, this is a great event. It's always great to talk to you, and I hope we could see each other again one day, like and maybe grab a drink once or something.
Face to face. Yeah, hopefully soon.
Yeah, exactly. So again, thank you all for watching. Thank you, Matt, once again, and we'll see you for the next one. Thank you so much.
All right, take care. Thanks a lot, Jeff.